So, okay, this is just the percent. So this one here is the inflation rate, the unemployment rate. You can see it goes up here, and unemployment's a lag indicator, which means it goes up later. So if there's a recession, typically what happens is employers don't lay off people immediately. They want to see how bad this is going to be. So that's why it's called a lag indicator. And it's a lag indicator at the other end too. They want to make sure the business is stable before they rehire. Because in this country, it's a pain in the butt to fire people. And it really is. And it's a pain in the butt to hire people. So you want to just kind of wait and say, all right, do we really want to fire everybody now? And so when things get bad, they typically wait. And then same thing at the other end, business is starting to pick up, but do we really want to hire? That's why temps are so big right now, because nobody wants to make a commitment to an employee. And so temp agencies and working for temps, there's no commitment. You just pay them, you don't worry about benefits, and you hire them and you fire them, and you don't have to go through all this stuff about, why are you firing and all that, right? So anyway, that's why you'll see, most of the time you'll see unemployment will peak in these little shaded areas. Those are recessions. So a lot of times you'll see unemployment go up or start going up, but peaks after the recession. Okay, so it kind of peaks even later. So by now we're actually recovering and it starts to drop down. This goes up after the recession, this goes up after the recession, this goes up. So that's just proving my point that it's a lag indicator. Okay, now when Phillips made his big debut about how unemployment and inflation go in opposite directions, it was really the thing. Okay, so governments had a choice. They could either choose unemployment or inflation, right? So if they decided they wanted to lower the unemployment rate, they could do it, but they had to risk in prices rising. It makes sense, right? Because if everybody's working, everybody's buying goods and services, and everybody's buying goods and services, and prices will go up. So that should just make sense. So that's what was the norm. And then in the so you could kind of tell here, but then in 1970-something, 73, you see both are going up. And that's like anti-Phillips curve. Because Phillips curve would say if one goes up, one goes down, right? But they're both going up, and that just was really weird for people. Because here, like you say, this is going up, that's going down. And so there's times where that does happen, where you see them going in opposite directions. But when they both go the same way, that's kind of weird. And that happened again in this period here when they both went up. All right, and so people started to think, well, if that's the case, the only way that both of these can go up is if the supply curve, the aggregate supply curve, goes to the left. So what happens is you have this aggregate demand curve, and then you have the aggregate supply curve. And let's just say, we're here and prices, our inflation rate is, pick a spot and say, before they went up. So let's pick this spot right here. They're both 5% right here. Okay, so if you went to 1974, they're both 5%. So you go, okay, well, inflation's 5%, and so that's prices, and down here we have real GDP isn't on our graph, but unemployment is, and we say, all right, that's 5% also. Right? We can just throw a number in for GDP and just say it's 1%, just for kicks. All right, so that's our starting point. Now, what happens, look 2 years later, and we're here, right? So we're at 12% inflation and about 9% unemployment. So how do we go from, so now we're way up here at 12%, and if unemployment is at 9%, that means we went this way, so GDP was negative, let's say negative 2%. So how do you go from here to here? Think about it. How do you do that? Yeah, the supply curve has to shift that way, right? So the supply curve shifted to the left, so we went to this new supply curve, I'll call it AS prime. Okay, so how did that happen where the whole supply curve shifted? And it never happened before. Nobody ever really talked about it happening before. So it probably did a little bit, but nobody ever really looked at this as saying, wow, this is interesting, because now what if we can control that supply curve? So what happens is now that we're both high, we have to figure out a way to shift the supply curve to the right. Because if you shift the supply curve to the right, then you have the best of both worlds. The worst of both worlds is when they both go up. If unemployment and inflation go up, it's called the misery index when you add the two up, because nobody likes either of them. And when they both go up together, that's called stagflation. Okay, so those are the, so this is what happened. It's called stagflation occurred, and the misery index went up to 21, add the two up, 9 and 12, okay, and so things were kind of bad. So the government is trying to think of ways, well, what are we going to do to stop this from happening? So as time went on, because they certainly didn't do it this time, as time went on, what happened was the government started to think, okay, what if we could develop policies that will help the supply side? So this is the beginning of supply side. This is the reason for supply side economics is because there are times when the aggregate supply curve shifts. The reason why it shifted in 73, 74 was because of, anyone? OPEC. Yep. There was an oil embargo. And so when there was this oil embargo, what it did is it caused the price of oil to skyrocket. And remember what the supply curve is. The supply curve is the cost of producing goods. That's all it does, is it's little, embedded in this line here is the cost of making things. So if oil goes up, then that's going to cause prices to go up. It's going to cause costs to go up, and when costs go up, prices go up. So that's what happened, is the oil shock of 73, 74 pushed the supply curve this direction. It happened again in 78, 79. And that's when people really start to take notice. And that was with the Iran, we had the Iran hostage situation, all that stuff going on, and that was, that was just a bad time for the economy because unemployment was rising, and unemployment got really high during that time, really high, like over 10%, and inflation was rising as well. Okay, so it happens because something pushes the aggregate supply curve, and the two big events that have done it in our history have been oil shocks. And I don't know if that can happen again. Because we produce so much oil ourselves now. We do so much, so it's not as likely to happen because OPEC's not as strong as it used to be. We produce a lot of, a lot more oil, there's a lot more fracking going on. So it's probably not likely to happen to this extent again. But it could certainly, there's something that could push the supply curve. All right, so where are we at? We're at this point here now where they have to do something. So the goal of supply side, which is goal of supply side economics, is to shift the supply curve to the right. Okay, and if that happens, then prices go down and unemployment goes down and everybody's happy and GDP goes up. It's the best of all three, right? Prices go down, unemployment goes down, GDP goes up, so life is wonderful. Okay, did it. Okay, so that's the thing. Okay, so now you have to say, all right, well, how do you do that? But remember the goal. The goal makes sense. We'd love to have prices lower, unemployment lower, and GDP higher. That's everybody would agree that that's a good thing, I think. Okay, so now how do you make that happen is the big question. So how can we, what are some policies that would influence the supply curve? Well, the goal, so now you have to tell, well, so we have to do something, remember, supply is all about cost. All right, it's all about cost. So you have to think of how can the government lower the cost for businesses? How can government, and what are the things that businesses spend money on? So this is from the government side now. And so the supply is all about cost. So now we're looking at, government policies that lower business costs. So what would that be? Well, that's what they're trying to do. That's what they try to figure out. Is like, what are some ways that we could do that? So just to kind of throw some of these things out at you, right? One of the things that happened right away. Well, let me think. Let's think about this. Think about an immigration policy, right? Now, and we have the craziest immigration policies in this country, right? I mean, right now it's like we don't really have a policy. Okay, but let's just say that the immigration policies are open to like temporary workers, migrant workers who come in here seasonally or whatever, and they come in here legally to work. Right? What would that do? In terms of our graphs here, what would that do? Yes?
Shift it to the right.
Yeah, it would lower the cost of production, right? It would lower the cost of business. So if there's a sort of I'm not saying like an open border thing, but I'm just saying if you brought a group in, like migrant workers in and low skilled workers in, and said, okay, we can let you stay here and all that stuff. Then that would be a way to reduce the supply curve or shift the supply curve to the right. What about trade policies? Free trade would be really good, right? Because now you're looking at what actually happened in the 1990s. Cool thing, you can see it right here, is they're both going down. They both trended down in the 90s. And this is what happened in the 90s that was cool for the economy or country. Our free trade agreements were really kicking in. And we had a bunch. So what happened is we had free trade. Look at them both trending downward. For that whole decade, we had a really good run. What happened here, of course, is it runs out, kind of runs out here. And then we had this recession. That was 2001. And that really started, right when the World Trade Centers issue. So that is why it went back up this way for a period of time. Because it was going really good there for a while. Now look, in this era here, we're trending back down again since 2000 and, let's say, so here. So about 2013, we're trending down a little bit. So that's good too. Okay? So trade policies would be a good thing. Free trade policies. Okay, that's definitely one factor that would impact it. Business taxes. Okay, so I've written a paper about this because what happened last time is when in 2017 they lowered business taxes a lot. Okay, so that is a supply side policy, right? I mean, does that make sense? That it would be supply side policy to lower business taxes? Yes, because it affects businesses. It's lowering the cost of doing business. So the intention is for the supply curve to shift to the right. So what happened? Well, once the supply curve shifts, or once the businesses get more money, so let's look at this policy. Right, you can just think to yourself, okay, now this business was going to have to pay $1 billion in taxes, and now they don't have to. Right? Just look at it like that extreme. So what are they going to do with their money? How will they spend their their profits, right? Their new windfall profits, right? Or tax money. How will they do that? And that's a big question. So there's ways that are good for the economy and stimulate the economy, and there's outcomes that don't stimulate the economy. And this is where supply side economics gets its the negative press about supply side economics comes from right here. Because let's say you give the owner of a company a tax break, and now they have $1 billion. Now, there's certain things they can do with that money. It's their money, right? It's their money. And so now what happens with that money? Well, there's a couple things they can do, all right? One, they can lower prices. Because now they don't need as much money. That would be good for the economy, right? Be a nice thing, right? And that would be cool, so everybody wins. The other thing they can do is they can increase wages. And that would be a nice thing, right? A lot of people making more money, that's what they call trickling down. So the wages, the money trickles down to the economy and everything, it trickles down to everybody, and that's a good thing. Okay, so increasing wages or lowering prices are good, yeah.
Could they increase the amount that they produce?
In that sense, they could produce more, okay, and that's going to depend. Well, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but that's called Say's law, and Say's law says that if you produce more, people will buy it, or supply creates its own demand, and so in other words, if that's what they were hoping would happen in the 80s, exactly what was hoping is that if you lower all these prices, people will start buying goods. And so it's like if you build it, they'll come, type of that type of thing. If the supply creates its own demand. And that's true, right? I mean, how many of us would have ever thought that we needed to have a phone with us at all times, checking our text messages, Instagrams, emails, and the latest scores? I mean, nobody when I was growing up thought we needed that. But supply, the fact that it's out there, has created a demand for it. So that we're all, so there is something to be said for Say's law. Okay? So they could supply more. Right? They could give money back to stockholders. Right? So you do dividends. Just to share more money with stockholders. They can pay their executives more. They can buy back stock. Okay? So there's a lot of these here, a lot of options of what they can do. They can do bonuses. They can increase benefits. And the general consensus out there is that what they do with this money is going to determine whether supply side policies work. So, for instance, okay, the paper that I wrote, we looked at 600 companies, and almost 70% of these companies that, after the last tax up, gave bonuses. Now, bonuses are different than a wage rate, a wage increase, right? Because bonuses, you give it to them once. A wage increase, you build off that for years to come. So bonuses were really popular because these companies had some, like I said, they had windfall profits, and they're like, here, let's give some to the employees. Okay, so that was cool, and that's why you're going to start seeing, or last year you were seeing a lot more people spending money because they had a little bit more money to spend, right? Their present income went up, so they're spending more money, and that's because GDP went up. So it causes this short-term sort of blip in GDP. And so it helps the economy for a while. Okay, increased wages would be better, lower prices are good. So this is good. Increasing benefits for workers, that trickles down to the economy. Bonuses trickle down to the economy. So these that I put checks next to are probably the best ones. These are the ones that supply side gets a different sort of a the rich get richer. Okay, so this is why supply side economics has people who don't know about it. You know more about it now than probably 99% of the people out there. All the rest of the people do out there is they just say, oh, supply side economics is stupid, it doesn't work. That's wrong, okay? It does work at times. right? It does work at times. It depends on what these businesses do with their money. So the premise of my paper was that, and it hasn't been published yet, and hopefully it will be soon, but the premise of the paper was that businesses will be more conscientious about what they do with their money. I'm sorry, I could throw in investing in their business too in here. Because the workforce is more concerned now about how businesses behave. Right? It's called corporate social responsibility. Right? So companies have to be aware of how they're viewed publicly. It matters now. It didn't used to matter how your company was pursued publicly, but now it does. So perception means something. So if you got a company out there and they're keeping all their money and they're buying all that stock, that sometimes makes them look bad. So there's a little bit more, clearly there's more companies doing these things now, lowering prices, increasing wages, giving bonuses, increasing benefits, and doing investing in their business, which all are good supply-side policies. There's a lot more of that happening now than there was when the last supply-side policies came through in the 80s. In the 80s, a lot of the money did go here, here, and here. Okay, a lot of the money did go to richer people. Right? There's no question about that. Right? And this recent one, this 2017 tax break that was just done, a lot more of it has gone to the workers and the consumers. Okay, so there's just differences, right? And you know that's just the way this thing works. Okay, so your job again here is to say, look at this and go, you know, what do I think about that? You know, do I think these things are good, or do they just help big businesses? And you know, you don't want you to say, oh, you know, big business is always bad, because big businesses hire like 80% of the people, and they're not. And you know, there's a lot of people who have put food on their tables because of big businesses. Okay, so there are some good things about just helping big businesses. Okay, so there's not, again, I don't want you to think 100% negative, because I know we hear in the press. You just have to see the both sides of everything. Okay, all right. So that's the goal here. So lowering business taxes is another one. All right. The next one is. And I know I beat that one up. Okay, so the next one is this. They got rid of a lot of what they call government bottlenecks. And I'll just say regulation. Government regulations tend to slow things down, right? And you guys, I don't know how many of you guys are going to go into politics here, but if you do, come back and you can come back someday and talk in front of my classes about how much these lobbyists control Congress, and how much if you want to do regulations slow things down, and there's groups that are trying to always get deregulation, and groups that are always trying to get regulated. It's kind of mad. Like right now, the big talk is whether or not like Google and Facebook should be more regulated, right? And how they have so much power, but should somebody come in and regulate them? Before, in the old days, it was the banks. Should the banks be more regulated? That was the big thing in 2008 when they were lending to everybody, and it caused this really bad recession. And before that, it was the airlines. Should the airlines be regulated? Because there was a time where they were had to charge certain prices, and then they were deregulated. And so to be regulated means that you're basically more controlled by the government. So to deregulate means that you have less control by the government, and typically that lowers a lot of prices, costs. Anybody here going into accounting, if you want to get a job, you go into compliance. Because internal auditing and all those things, they're just on fire now because of all the regulations. It's absolutely incredible. Right? And I'm a financial planner too, and I have to do compliance stuff all the time. It's like, it seems like every month there's like another test you have to take for compliance. And it's like, didn't I just do that? You know, don't I know I'm not supposed to, you know, take money from old people and you know, and invest in, you know, risky things. I mean, it's just, but that happens. You have to go through this stuff all the time. It's just the way it works. So anyway, that's what a really good one of the policies here. All right. The other thing that happened a lot was with the unions. Remember, unions affect wages, right? Unions affect wages. And wages cause this, if wages increase, the supply curve shifts to the left. If wages decrease, the supply curve shifts to the right. So union power makes wages go up and it pushes the supply curve this way. So unions being supported and making a lot of money, well, that's one of the things that happened in 1980, 81, was that when Reagan became president, the air traffic controllers went on strike. And air traffic controllers, as we know, are very, very, very important, right, for national security. So they do come under the president. So the president has control over that industry because it's a national security, obviously importance, of national security importance. Right? It helps our country run. Well, they all went on strike. Reagan gave them like a month and said, figure it out in a month or you're all fired. And they didn't, so he fired them all. Okay? Now, and what he did, he's brought up military people, and military people who have been trained in air traffic control just as well as the people in the private sector. But what type of message did that send to the unions when the President of the United States says, we're not going to negotiate? You're paid a fair salary, you make more, plenty of money, you have great benefits, and in our view, take it or leave it type of thing. What type of message does that send to the unions? Huh? Yeah, you're not, you don't, there's a new sheriff in town, right? You don't have the same power that you used to have. And the funny thing was, as soon as Clinton became president, 13 years later, he reinstated them all. But they all had jobs by then. But it was symbolic. But he was doing the opposite. He was sending the opposite message, the symbolic message saying, I will support you guys. Reagan was like, no, I want to keep wages down. So unions in this country have very little power, but it has nothing to do with the government. The private sector unions don't have a lot of power in this country, mainly because they have to compete. Right? They have to compete, and so unions don't have a lot of power. They can't ask for higher wages because that would cause prices to go up, and then nobody's buying Ford automobiles. So say what you want to say, but your wages have to be, in line. Otherwise, your product has to be so much better that people will still buy it at the highest prices, and that's not happening. Okay, so what happened in our country is unions, on the private sector unions have gone like this, public sector unions have gone like that. Okay, so now we have a lot of teachers unions, public sector, police, public sector, all right? They're all public sector unions. That's completely different. Okay? Right to work states tend not to have those, and then the other states have a lot of public unions. Point is, unions cause wages to go up. So the test question would be, unions have caused wages to go up and the average supply curve to shift to the left. And that's not a good thing for the economy. Okay, so the government looks in this and they have their different views, right? I mean, you want, there's presidents that are, and right now it's really interesting because Trump's a very pro-union, pro-America guy, and he's Republican. So that's different than he got the union vote in the last election because he wants to keep jobs in America and they like that. So it's just sometimes it crosses party lines and sometimes it's just, anyway. But we know what it means for supply side economics. Right? Right. Okay, how are we doing? Good. Okay, so the tax credits are important. We talked last class about giving land and deals to companies coming in. States take this really serious. They really want to put together the best option and the best. They want to put together like this really good kind of plan so that they can entice businesses to come in and work, or to host them in their state. We want Amazon to come in, so we're going to give them this great deal, or we want BMW to come in, so we're going to give them this great deal. That's all supply side economics. Giving them property, giving them tax breaks, giving them like what they did with BMW that said you can go, all of your trainees can go to our tech schools for free. I mean, that's all supply side economics. It's all dealing with putting a product out there. All right? So those things would be supply side oriented. And what else do I have here? Yeah, it says about right now the government employs about 30% of the workforce. So that means, like I'm a state employee. Okay, so there's about 30. So I'm one of them. Okay, so about 30% of the people work for the government. So that means that the government can control wages to some extent, because they do control how much we make, and they control how much government employees make. Okay, and so that's why, again, the government they're part of this whole supply curve too. And what am I leaving out here? All right. So one of the big things that really helps on the supply side is productivity. So I'm just going to go do that, and then I'll be done with it. All right. So productivity. If it increases, then workers' output per dollar, right, per dollar spent, increases. Right, so you'd say unit labor cost decreases. And so that causes, so average supply shifts right. Bottom line is, a more productive workforce is going to shift the supply curve to the right. So can the government implement policies to increase the productivity of the workforce? And the answer is, I don't know. It's a hard thing to really, yeah.
I mean, they offer patents and trademarks, which kind of like inadvertently offers the opportunity for people to go out and find more efficient ways to do it, knowing that if they find a better, build a better mousetrap,
That's really good, yeah.
They can sell it and protect the money of it. So it's not like direct, but there's an opportunity there.
No, that's a great point. I mean, research patents would be a really good way to inspire somebody to find a better process, and you can then make money off of it. Okay, that's good. Any other ways that you feel, what makes you more productive? More incentives. So can the government give those incentives? Sometimes they can be involved in them. In this country, not as much. Mainly that's done at a company basis, but the government can encourage that. They can encourage that environment. But the productivity is kind of up to us. I mean, what inspires you? What's going to make you want to work harder? And the answer is money. Right, number one answer. Even with millennials, the facts are out there, and these millennials who want to save the world and be like, I want a job that matters. Like my daughter comes home from work and she's like, why do I work there? Because she knows the owner of the company, when all I do, my whole job is to make him more money. And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. Because she's right? I mean, that's she wants to make a difference in the world, and she says, if I do a really good job, he's going to make more money. Yep. He is, and you can keep your job, but I don't want my job. And believe me, I have a house of millennials. I know it, and I get it, and I think this generation is awesome, and the fact that they don't just look at money, but money is part of it. So
Can't
even
say the world-
all the literature out there says that even with millennials, pay is the number one still. Because you want to feel like you're being treated fair, you want to feel like the company respects you. It's a different reason, right? Like in the old days, it was paying matter because you wanted to buy a new car and show off your new car and buy a new house and show. Now it's paying matters because you want to know that they care about you. It's different, but it still matters. So pay does matter. Government can't tell companies what to pay. They can't do that. It's not in this country, at least, all right? So that's, I'm just kind of scratching the surface on supply side, but I just want to give you an overview on it.